Hello and welcome to my channel, The Rambling Millennial, and we're back to discuss Chapter 2 of the book Balcony of Fog. As I said, I'm giving this book a chance, and yes, there are again some red flags for myself, but nothing I consider quite as serious as what I found in Chapter 1. As a disclaimer, if you're new to the topic of this book or discussion regarding this particular book, I in no way endorse it. I as well do not condone certain actions or events that take place in this book. And I was intent on making a full series till the end of this book. But I could discontinue at any moment. And I say this because it's possible that the book could have objectionable material that does not fall in line with my beliefs. So we'll start off by giving a brief synopsis of Chapter 2, events that happened, and then I'll discuss my thoughts regarding how the writer executed everything. Before we start, I just wanted to give you a quick info drop. Wanted to let you know that if you're just interested in my personal thoughts regarding the book, Chapter 2's execution, you can check the description below for the timestamp so that you can just skip ahead right over the synopsis. And we'll go ahead and we'll start by giving the brief synopsis and set up for Chapter 2. We're immediately thrust into the issue that Arden will have to face now. The residents of the facility have found out that Arden has Estra in his quarters, which of course is going to make trouble for him. And then some of the higher ups or leaders become involved. And it makes one question: what reasonable person would put these people to be in charge? But going beyond that, we'll go to Neely, and we realize that yes, he is very, very spineless. He rats out details regarding Arden when threatened. Arden isn't exactly caught for his crime and is set free from being tortured. That's when he decides that he and Estra need to make their escape. They do so, but it turns out to be a trap, and the two are chased all the way to the Marriott. And again, I must apologize in case I am pronouncing the name incorrectly, but that's just how I can say it at the moment. Leading the charge is the oh-so-lovable Jiggers, displaying the qualities that we've come to love about him. That gorgeous royal mentality, but he has all the power of middle management. Wonderful. And he has, of course, a focus on Arden that is, well, kind of sad. Later on, their means of escape, Arden's only hope at the time, the Marriott, is burned. And the two continue running for a while in the outlands, and those who are hunting them all turn back when wild cats enter into the picture. Of course, that means that Arden and Estra must now face these wild cats, and Arden does so and successfully fends them off for now. Then he and Estra they find a bit of shelter and have an exchange of dialogue. Then we get to, well, personally my favorite part of Chapter 2, a little bit of world building, and the writer uses ancient types of mythos. Is not actually directly correlated to anything that we know to be ancient history, but it has the tones. And here we find that sacrifice and technology are merged as one. Here we're giving a little bit of backstory about how Arden survived becoming a sacrifice and why his boat inherited the name the Marriott. The scene set for the past is ritualistic with overtones reminding one of cults modern day Christianity, and ancient civilizations such as the Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas. Oh, excuse me, Incans. The backstory can be taken in, many different lights. It could be seen as world building, interesting, sad, depressing, or the other host of emotions that the writer is trying to evoke. But the main goal of this particular line of story is to create an attachment to the obviously traumatized Arden. Moving from Arden's little bit of storytelling, the reader is thusly thrown into a world that Estra is familiar with. However, the reader nor Arden are familiar with Estra's world. The reader is going to be now required to really stretch those muscles in their imagination to make sense of the livery and imagery that the writer is trying to paint. The entire idea of the final and closing pages of chapter 2 isn't so much to explain how all of it's happening, but just that it is happening. The reader is going to be required to abandon all sense of logic, as Arden has to do the same thing. And continuing to read, you'll have to follow the flow of writing in order to get some semblance of stability. And that's basically the synopsis of chapter 2. I have left out a little bit regarding the closing pages of chapter 2, but I have to say that the best way for you to truly understand what's going on is to read it for yourself. It's kind of difficult to explain. So now that we're done with the synopsis, I'll go ahead and we'll dive into how I perceive this chapter and if the writer has drawn me in yet. Now, something I will say that I appreciate about chapter 2 is the writer going ahead and making Arden and Estra's secret come out. It seems pretty realistic for the type of location that they're in, because the people in control want absolute control over everything that's going on. Again, I have to say that this facility that they're staying in seems very cult-like, so it seems like they want everybody to do things in a certain way. So I find that it was somewhat realistic for the writer to go the direction where they're immediately found out. So that was a welcome aspect of the story. Now, I will say this too. Another point for the writer, I really did appreciate him doing a decent job for the cafeteria. This was just a small point that I liked. It's nothing important or crazy or mind-blowing. It's just that he made a distinction between the leader and the toilers sitting in the cafeteria. Which, of course, if you're going to write a character in, even though it was a very non-important role, a leader versus those who work under the leader, it's important that you set a distinction between the two, and I thought that was a very good thing that he did. So I will say, good job, Rich. However, when we get to the cafeteria, there was something that did peeve me a little bit after I read the entire chapter, and that has to do with Estra. Now, she was in a different location. She wasn't found out exactly per se, and I feel like the writer could have done so much more with this event where Arden is being questioned about Estra. The writer could have used it as an opportunity to display his writing chops. It could have given Estra a bit of a side story and made her more interesting as a character. And the premise that I'm thinking he could have went with was how Estra got around in the facility, how she stayed out of sight. And this would give a much more tense atmosphere if she's ducking and hiding and trying to keep out of sight whilst Arden is being questioned in the cafeteria. And I believe for the writer, it was a missed opportunity. It was something that could have really made the chapter even more interesting. But he does make up for it a little later on when Arden and Estra make their escape. He does create a tense atmosphere, and you could say that one would probably be at the edge of their seat, rooting for Arden and Estra to make their escape successfully. And I was pretty invested in Arden and Estra making their escape and keeping a distance between them and their would-be captors. However, later events, or rather the event shortly after that occurs, made me pause. I seriously considered not finishing chapter 2 for the day, but I went ahead and did it. I'm glad I did. But I'm going to pick a bone at this particular portion of the chapter. The writer again decides to give Arden and Estra a moment together, and this pause, it seems like it was meant to create an attachment for the reader towards Arden and Estra being a couple. And it's supposed to seem heartwarming, or it's supposed to seem like that, but for me it was just cringe-worthy. Not my cup of tea. And for the writer, I have to say this: I love a good romance. I can name plenty of movie titles that I enjoyed that had a great romantic story and background. I read books. I ship characters that I like romance, but I have my limits, and I know what I like to see. And Arden and Estra are not cutting it. And I think the reason for that is Arden and Estra are not feasible or real when it comes to their romance or romantic overtones. I don't know if I can describe it a romance yet, but it's unfeasible. It's just not real. And I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself. And I have to say that I'm not a professional or someone who claims to be a critic, someone paid to talk about certain types of media. But I did want to be honest in the experience I had whilst reading. And it's difficult to separate the emotional aspect from the logical aspect and to give a fair judgment. So I'm going to be honest, in my personal opinion, Arden and Estra could really ruin this book as far as their romance goes. But to be fair, in order for you to actually give a judgment to a book, as the saying goes, or to a picture, you have to look at the whole thing. And so, whilst Arden, messed that up again. Arden and Estra, their romantic tones are completely unwarranted. That I I believe that's a hands down fact. It's completely unwarranted for the first two chapters. They don't have the believability required to carry the book as a couple. And if it were me writing, or rather a suggestion to the writer, I would do it like this. I would establish them as individuals whilst being together. And then I would allow them to develop an attachment. That's how I would go as far as romance. But instead of getting something gradual, feasible, seemingly real, we got a romance within 2 chapters for absolutely no reason, with no foundation. And I find it rather, to be irritating. But that's not to say that the book is without redeeming qualities. And I'm going to speak from a personal perspective on something that I personally enjoyed. And this is the portion of the book where we get into Arden's backstory, and Arden explains how the Marriott got its name. We're taken to Arden's past as a child, and he finds himself soon to be sacrificed with his caretaker. And I have to say, the writer's writing was incredible. Excuse me again. It reminded me so much of ancient civilizations. I was just fascinated how humanity could fall backwards so hard when they seem to be living in a postmodern world, or post-apocalyptic. The people once again find themselves drowning in superstitious beliefs, and all of this is blended into a formal setting that uses religious overtones and what we consider to be modern technology or modern elements. And the flashback story put me in the mindset of the Incans, the Mayans, the Aztecs, and it had a blend of cultist overtones and modern Christianity. And for me, it was an impressive display of imagination, to the writer's credit. But I have to say, the backstory was a redeeming quality for me. I enjoy mythology and history and other things, of course, but those two things you can kind of see in this particular scene. And it was beautiful. But to me, I can't say that it would be pleasing to someone else. In fact, it's possible that it could offend someone's conscience and make someone ask a viable question: what are they reading? And I'm constantly asking myself that question. But to the writer's credit, I have to say this, coming away from my personal opinion, the entire scene is well described, allowing the reader to create a very accurate image within their mind. And that in itself is a winning point for the writer. But I can't say that it's a definite win for the reader. Moving on, we're introduced to more world building, where the writer is really stretching his legs when it comes to describing the vivid imagery within his mind. I found myself on a journey of crystal clear beauty. The writer plays on some basic aspects of humanity that most people are familiar with, especially towards the ending of the chapter. He toys with people's natural inclination towards the wonderment of clouds that bejewel the sky. He brings the curiosity to a whole nother level that forces you to use your imagination to put yourself high in the sky, living in a fantasy. And the exposition, at least to myself, is actually pretty incredible. And it more than makes up and covers over the cringy romance that's found. But I will say this. I don't feel any closer to Arden as a character reading chapter 2. And Estra, she's still surrounded by mystery, especially concerning where she came from and how it plays a part in her as a character. This does make Estra a little bit more interesting because you want to find out more about her. But for myself, there's still no attachment to her as a character. But I will say this as well. Rich's ability to pull you from reality just for a moment is pretty impressive. I'll give him extra points because of Arden's backstory regarding the Marriott. It doesn't fit everyone else's taste, but I think that was an excellent display of writing ability. And in all honesty, I will say that I'm pretty curious to find out what chapter 3 is going to bring out about this new fantasy world we find ourselves in, high in the sky. But I will say also that I'm not completely invested in this book still. I'm not at the point where I just want to dive in and just read chapter after chapter. And I'm kind of hoping that the writer can change my mind in the next few chapters. Now, if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for checking this review out. And if you've read this book, please feel free to comment below on your opinions regarding chapter 2. And finally, I just want to say, continue to be safe and have a great day. Until next time.